So we are reviewing for the test, and the first problem I want to do with you is this one. It's going to have a split, but not right away. First you do a couple of steps, and then you split it into two parts. And then you got to remember that there's a less than and a greater than. And then you got to put it on a number line. And then you got to make sure you shade in the right part of the number line. This is one of the things that separates higher algebra and pre-calc. Because pre-calc, you have so many steps. I'm pretty sure you all started by adding 8. Pretty sure you all know to divide by 2. Some kids still think you multiply the 2 in. You do not. Now is the moment for the split. Take your time. Remember, at the end it has a number line, and the way I know, that looks like the tip of a number line. Digital school jeepers version. That's what we're going for the 19 after multiple choice. Turf, you were gone for a bit, but I'm still going to see. Do you remember what to do on this guy? All right, so we got 2x minus 3 is less than 9, and 2x minus 3 is greater than negative 9. There you go. Notice the only differences are that sign changes to greater, and this becomes a negative 9. X is less than 6. I hope that was one of your answers. X is greater than negative 3. Put it on a number line. Negative 3, 6. Empty circles. How come empty? Because it's not equal to. If there had been an equal to sign here, then I would have filled them in. X is less than 6 means I shade this way from the 6. And X is bigger than, if you still don't know which sign is which, you got to learn that. That's the greater than sign. The less than sign looks like the L here. X is greater than negative 3, that goes that way, and then that means we shade in the middle. But what about that thing where you test intervals? You could totally do that. What's between negative 3 and 6? 0 is. I go stick 0 in the problem. Anywhere, like I'll pick this part of the problem, put a 0 in here, and I'd have absolute value of negative 3, which would be 3. 3 is less than 9. That's true. So that worked. So we shade here. All right. I did notice that on one of our previous quizzes that was given, it said all answers must be in interval notation. Would you please write this in interval notation now? If I caught you using it, I'd have to put it in phone jail. All right, Hallie, what do you think we do? Would it have mattered if you used brackets?
Yes.
Yes, and it would have been wrong because this has empty spots So you use parentheses. Yes?
Why don't we have a U?
There's only one of them. If there was another set, like, oh, and from 8 to infinity, anytime there's two sets, you put a U. There's not two sets. There's just one set. Okay. Next kind. Right off of the type of problems that you have to know for the test. This one's going to involve factoring. I hope you know if you can factor it, you should. I think this is the first moment for some of you where you're finally good at factoring, where it's just kind of automatic. X and X. Is it plus? No, that doesn't make sense because they would have to all be pluses. Is it plus minus? It usually is, but it isn't in this case, because how would you take a positive and a negative and make it come out to positive 9? You couldn't. So it has to be a negative and a negative. How many of you caught that? Good. And then 9 is probably a 9 and a 1, but you quickly realize with a 9 and a 1, how on earth are you going to make it equal 6? So it can't be that. So it's not 9 and a 1, so then it must be a 3 and a 3. And then you can make sure that that works by doing the outside and the inside. When you put those together, you get negative 6x, exactly what we wanted. All of that work to just get the answer of 3. And then if you just said x equals 3, I would cry a little bit and definitely mark it wrong. Because this is supposed to be a range of answers that, goes on a number line. So it's something about 3, but I put my number line, I put a 3, I put an empty circle, and now I got to figure out where to shade. Because it says bigger than, no, don't just shade to the right. That would be wrong. You got to test intervals. Thank you. So I'm going to test 4 and see if it works. That's the way to tell. Just because this has a greater does not mean you shade to the right. I'm telling you, that would screw you up on 9 out of 10 problems. Okay, so I'm going to test 4. 4 goes here, 4 goes here. And it turns out to be 1 times 1 is bigger than 0. 1 is bigger than 0. It worked. I do shade to the right, but it's not because that sign there. It's because I stuck a 4 in and tested it. And now this is really important. A lot of people probably think that they're done right here, and you would get it wrong because you haven't tested something in this interval, like 2. Everybody test 2 and see what happens. Jack, can you walk me through testing 2?
So you put 2 in for x's.
Yep.
2 minus 3 is
Negative 1 times negative 1, and it's supposed to be bigger than 0. Positive 1 is bigger than 0. Seemed like it worked. And it did work. So the answer was everything except 3. Do you remember we had one just like that on the quiz that I gave you yesterday? You know, the very first problem on the quiz? Yeah, it was an empty circle at, I think that one was 2 or something, but it worked. Everything around that worked, just that one number didn't work. That's what this is like. Everything works on this equation except for 3. If you wanted to even check 3, you could. If you put 3 in, you'd find that it was 0 times 0 is greater than 0. And 0 is not greater than 0. That's why 3 doesn't work. And if you had to write it, Claudia, I bet you can do it because you were talking about the U, so you're probably going to do it right. How would interval notation look?
Parentheses, negative infinity, 3, parentheses U, then parentheses 3,
You are correct. That's the interval notation way to say that. All right, that was a really good one to practice. But wait, there's one. Not that one. Yeah. Okay. Let's try this one. 2x to the third, right away you should know something's up, because normally we do quadratics, which are squared, so something's weird's going to happen here. Minus 3x squared is greater than 5x. You always set it to what? 0. So step 1, take away 5x. All right, 2x to the third minus 3x squared minus 5x is greater than 0. And now, if you haven't caught it by now, I need to just tell you, factor out the x. 2x squared minus 3x minus 5. Because there's an x in everything. And really what I'm doing is dividing everything by x. Some kids have never seen it that way, and I like that way. It shows you what to put here, here, and here by dividing everything by x. Okay. And now, if you can factor it, you should. So you factor it again. Man, this is the kind of problem that really makes me go, yup, you're in pre-calc now. Because you have to know to set it to 0. You have to know how to factor out a GCF. You need to know how to factor it when the lead number is not just a 1. 2x and x. If you didn't know that, take note. And then, it's got to be a plus and a minus. In my opinion, to always do the signs next. Because this number is negative, you have to have one positive and one negative. And then it's got to be a 5 and a 1. At least that last thing was easy. If you know what the worst number I could put there is? 24. Because then it could be 8 times 3. It could be 2 times 12. It could be 24 times 1. Or it could be 6 times 4. That'd be brutal. And it would just make you go through all those combos until you finally find the one that works. But this is super simple. It's got to be a 5 and a 1. I think it's 1 and 5 like this, but I don't know until I check. So now I check the outside and the inside. The smiley face of factoring. 1x and negative 10x, and I was wrong. Yeah, it is not even close to negative 3x. So if it's not even close, you switch the numbers around. If it had been the opposite of what I wanted, I would have just switched the signs. So now I switched the numbers, and maybe that'll do it. 5x, negative 2x. That makes positive 3x. Oh, I'm so close. I wanted negative 3x. So do I have to switch the numbers around again? No, I switched the signs. So then this minus becomes a plus, this minus becomes a plus, and that's a minus. And I think that I've got it. Anybody verify they had the same thing as me? Sweet. Okay. But then, you're not done. Because it says greater than 0, that means number line time. And 0's one of your answers. Negative 1 is one of your answers. And 2x minus 5 equals 0 is the way I would say this one. So 2x equals 5. So x equals 5 over 2. And if my grade depended on it, I might just go in quick and go, 5 over 2, is that really it? Oh yeah, the 2's will cancel, and then it'll be 5 minus 5. And that's 0, and that's what I want. There's my three answers, 0, 2.5, and negative 1. So here's me putting them on a number line. Negative 1, 0, 2.5. All empty circles, because there's no or equal to sign. Man, look at all of this work. And we're still not done with what I consider the hardest part, which is testing intervals. It's not like it's incredibly hard, but kids often screw it up. So I'm going to test something big, like, I don't know, 5. Something bigger than 2.5. So I'm going to go put 5 back in the original problem. Actually, I'm going to put it in the factored version. I'm going to put a 5 in here. And it'll read 5 times 2 times 5 minus 5. And then 5 plus 1 should be bigger than 0. So this is 2 times 5 is 10, minus 5 is 5. 5 times 5 is 25 times 6. And at this point, hear me, I don't need you to figure out what 25 times 6 is. I know that's bigger than 0. Know what I mean? No sense in, I don't even care if I happen to know what 25 times 6 is, because 25 times 4 is 100, so a couple more 25s would be 150. But you wouldn't even need to know that. You just need to know it's bigger than 0, and it is, so it worked. And then, do you remember this deal? Usually the one next to it doesn't work then, and usually then the one after that does work. So I just checked that quick by putting in negative a half. I know it's a pain, but if you put in negative a half, you'd find out that you have a negative times this one would turn out to be negative also. And a negative times a positive makes a positive, and positives are bigger than 0. So I checked, and this worked. And then my theory would be that this wouldn't work also. But I should really stick in negative 2 in my original equation just to shake it up. What if I put in negative 2 here? I can do that. This will be 2 times negative 8 is negative 16 minus negative 2 squared is 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. And then greater than 5x, and x was negative 2, so 5 times negative 2. That's negative 10. Is that bigger than that? No, it is not. It's like negative 28 is not bigger than negative 10. Nope. So then this is nope. Okay. That would be the hardest question on the test. Number 1, you got to notice that it equals 0. Number 2, you got to factor it even though the lead term isn't 1. And you got like a 2x here. Next, you have to know there's 3 things on the number line. Then you have to check the intervals around it. Holy cow. And then if Claudia's nightmare happens, you got to write it with the U and everything. It isn't that bad, is it? Negative 1 to 0, union 2.5 to infinity. Okay, question?
How do you know when you're supposed to use the union sign?
All right, the U only happens when you have 2 intervals. If you ever have 2 intervals, just put a U in between them. U just means this works or this works. The shortcut for U is or. So this works or this works. Your answer could be in here or there.
So if there's 2 shaded parts.
Yes, if there's 2 shaded parts, then there would be 2 intervals. And if there's any time there's 2 intervals, you put a little U in between them. Okay, now, I think there's only one, yep, there's one left. And that goes like this. Well, once we're done practicing this, you have a bunch of work time where you can walk up and ask for help. Square root of 3x minus 5 equals x plus 1. How would you solve that? I think most people know how to get rid of a square root, but not everybody. And the next thing is, most people know how to square x plus 1, but not everybody. And at the end, you'll probably run into a problem where you can't factor the thing. You know, if you can factor it, you should. But what if you can't factor it? You're supposed to know what to do. Let's see if you do. This would be what I would consider the second hardest question.
I squared both sides.
Excellent. So we square both sides. This just becomes 3x minus 5. Yay, easy again. This side, x plus 1, x plus 1. And I have this weird thing where when I multiply this out, I usually get x squared, and I do 1 times 1 makes 2. I know some of you did it. Don't deny it. 1x, 1x, 2x, and then I do 1 times 1 and I say 2, but it's not. 1 times 1 is 1. So if you had a 2 right there, that's a very common mistake, because 1 times 1 obviously isn't 2, but it feels like it should be sometimes. Then I'm going to subtract 3x from both sides. And I get negative 5 equals x squared minus x plus 1, and then I add 5 to both sides. Remember, we're in the process of setting it equal to 0. X squared minus x plus 6. And that's painfully close to being able to be factored, but it won't factor. Or will it? Maybe it will. No. I think if it had been a minus 6, I think it would have factored. But here, if you guys think, maybe you think you've got it. Can you tell me something you think it factors to? I know some of you are probably thinking 3 times 2 is 6, right? And so you're probably thinking there's a 3 and a 2, and then that would also make a difference of 1, and so it seems like it's got potential. But they'd have to both be negative to make a positive 6. And then you'd end up with negative 3x and negative 2x, which does not make negative x. So it doesn't factor. So I warned you it probably wouldn't factor. So there's a follow-up to my favorite saying. If you can factor it, you should. If you can't factor it, you use the quadratic what? Formula. X equals negative b. I'll write it. You stick the numbers in. Plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And if you're like, could there be something like that on the test? Yes. I've been warning you since the beginning. This is one of those algebra basics. It's right off the first 20. You got to have this formula memorized. So now you can stick in 1 for A, negative 1 for B, and 6 for C, and simplify it down. So A is 1. I'm going to put that. There's only 2 spots where there's an A. 1 and 1. B's negative 1, negative 1, negative 1. And C, there's only 1 spot for the C, it's right there, is 6. 6 goes there. It's all under the root. So then it's negative, negative 1 is 1, plus or minus, square root of, negative 1 squared is 1, minus 24, all over 2. And at that moment, you would be allowed to say no solution. Do you know why? You can't have square root of a negative. No solution. In pre-calc, some of the toughest problems end up being no solution. But just make sure you understand this. You can't just scribble out all your work and then say no solution. Because that's what I'd do every time. If I was on a test and I got stuck, I'd be like, oh, it's probably no solution. I'll just write no solution. You can't get credit for that. You got to know what the solution was and then be able to say, oh, but that has no solution. So you got to have this and then say no solution. That means there's no answers to the question. That is a real thing. Happens in the real world. You might be like, why don't they power rockets with electricity? Because you can't. There's no solution. There is no way to do that. Yet, maybe someday, the only thing you can do to kind of cheat is you can use electricity to make the fuel, which then goes in the rocket. The rockets that get to outer space can't be powered by electricity unless you use electricity to make the fuel, which you then put in the rocket. Okay, so the point is there is no problems in the real world that have no solution. It just doesn't work. I want an iPhone that weighs -1 pound. No solution. Maybe someday. All right, you have a whole bunch of time to work now. So if you got stuck kind of anywhere in any of those kinds, or if you're on the review worksheet that I had you take out earlier and you're stuck, then come up and ask. And the third option is I put up a Schoology quiz. It says optional in the title. You don't have to do it. But if you're trying to avoid a retake tomorrow and you've already done your whole worksheet, maybe that'd be something you could do. Or you're at home tonight and you're like, man, I should probably study for that quiz tomorrow. Don't really want to, but maybe I should because I don't want to have to retake it. Save yourself the 2-hour retake dance. Do a little something extra tonight. And that's all I have for you for the video for today.